Trade wars suck, but you know what sucks arguably even more? Hot wars. Speaking of hot wars, is President Trump gonna start one? Because oh boy, with his talks about Greenland and Panama and Mexico, it sure seems like something that might be on the menu. And you know what else? He's acknowledged before that starting a war is a way to boost your approval rating, boost your popularity in uncertain times. He tweeted back during the Obama presidency that Obama would start war with, I believe it was Iran, in order to boost his approval ratings, because it was at a point where Obama's approval ratings were a good bit lower than they usually were. So Trump recognizes that there's some foreign policy moves that can be made that might pump up your approval rating. He certainly paid attention to the 9/11 era and George W. Bush's approval rating during that, how he enjoyed a nearly 90% approval rating after September 11th and during the early days of the War on Terror, the Afghanistan War and the Iraq War. He continued to have a solid approval rating, though not quite in the 90s. But the issue is, how on earth could Trump justify this? How on earth could he say, oh, it's time to go to war, guys, and have the entire nation, or at least a good chunk of the nation, other than his supporters, get behind it? Would normies really just say, oh, yeah, no, President Trump, I'm not a big fan of that guy, but I think this is a totally just cause. He's going to war, and, our country's got to do what we got to do. So, yeah, bring back the draft or whatever, and let's fight. That doesn't sound like something that's going to happen, given the way that people feel about Trump and war in general. But the Republican Party and the hard right are experts at finding pretexts for awful, absurd, corrupt things. Elon Musk uses waste, fraud, and abuse, all as pretexts for gutting the federal government, gutting programs that help regular Americans. And he's continuing to use it as a pretext, and supporters of Trump continue to take him at face value for it. Taking things at face value isn't a wise idea, but sometimes people do it when it can help them, when it can help them politically, when it's convenient. It's so convenient to butcher the federal government and say, this is in the name of fighting waste, fraud, and abuse. If you don't approve of what Musk and Trump are doing, then you must be an enabler of waste, fraud, and abuse. You might just be mad that your USAID is getting cut or something, and you're funded by USAID. That's an actual argument they make. So when Trump finds some sort of pretext, when he and Elon Musk and throw a few other people in there, like Pete Hegseth, find some sort of pretext for disastrous foreign policy, it might work. It might work. I mean, it'll work on their supporters, most of their supporters. We know that. But it might work on people other than their supporters. The unfortunate reality is that there are too many people, including people who aren't Trump supporters, who are kind of gullible, kind of credulous. And that's not that they're to say that they're dumb, but sometimes they do take things at face value. They'll say, oh, Trump's going to war. We were attacked. This is defensive. We need to do this, so we got to do it. Some people have suggested that Trump might have a false flag opportunity or attempt on the way. That's a bit extreme, considering it's not the first time that a president has been thought to want a false flag to happen. I mean, George W. Bush has sometimes been accused of himself doing 9/11. That's totally false. There's no evidence that this was done, and a lot of progressives would concede that no, as much as we don't like Bush, he did not do 9/11. This was not an inside job, and they'll point out different ways in which it just would be ridiculous, that the idea that he did 9/11. Trump is less scrupulous and more depraved than George W. Bush. I think that's fair to say, both as a person and as a president. And that's not to say that he's as much of a neocon as Bush so far. I mean, he hasn't invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. He hasn't necessarily invaded any countries. So he's less of a neocon so far. But the operating words there are so and far. Because he's still got 3 years left as president, and he does not have to face the prospect of re-election. He can't run for a third term under the 22nd Amendment, even though he wants to, apparently. So he's unchained. He's got loyalists in his administration. I do wonder, though, if normies would trust Trump's administration, given that most people who are not Trump supporters, and even some Trump supporters, understand that his administration is full of loyalists, So how much can we take their word for it? They're just focused on pursuing the Trump agenda and not upsetting their big orange master, and that's the end of the story. They have no other goals. Would Trump supporters even potentially say, you know what, it seems like Trump is being manipulated by the neocons, and say they don't support it? I don't know. Maybe there would be some backlash, and they wouldn't blame Trump, of course, because they can't do that. They would blame the neocons. They might accuse Pete Hegseth of being a neocon, which, by the way, he is. But they would say, "Oh yeah, no, Trump's not actually going to war with these other countries. It's his administration who is manipulating him, and he needs to fire some of them again, just like he did in his first term to people who manipulated him." They say, "Oh, he should have fired Fauci. He went along with Fauci too much." He had John Bolton in his administration, and some right wingers have criticized him for that, which I think is good on their part. Some Trump supporters recognize that John Bolton is not a great guy. Some others, he fired Jeff Sessions. There was a beef between them. So, yeah, he's an interesting character for sure. Do we know what he's going to do? No. He's still got 3 years left. So it's like, what is he going to do to pump up his approval rating? This tariff thing has arguably, it's been essentially the Iraq invasion of Trump's presidency, except it's on the economy, basically, economic matters. And it's so extreme that people on the left are saying that he's intentionally destroying the economy, that this must be a deliberate ploy to justify privatization of the economy. Talk about, again, a pretext. Create a pretext, like, look how bad the economy is. We need the private actors to step in because government screws things up. And it's like, well, you're the government. You screw things up. You and the Republican Party screw things up, and then you hand things over to private parties, to corporations, to your donors, oligarch friends. So, yeah, it's circular reasoning for sure. And so people on the left recognize that. But people on the right, also to their credit, tend to recognize that tariffs are not that good. Ben Shapiro, Sean Fitzgerald, or as he's known on YouTube, Actual Justice Warrior. Even Matt Christensen expressed some hesitation about the idea of tariffs. He's like, I don't know how well this is being implemented or how well it will go, even if I sort of agree with the goals. The goals being, supposedly increasing boosting domestic production and helping the U.S. in the long term. Now, I don't believe that's what's going to happen, but some people on the right do, and they're just saying, well, I don't like the methods he's using to get to that point. And okay, at least they can criticize him on something. They're criticizing him on procedure rather than substance, but better that than to kiss his butt on both procedure and substance. So, is there a war coming down the pipeline? What nations would it be with? Would Trump send troops to Ukraine? Would he start fighting on the side of Russia? I arguably would not put it past him. We've seen the way he treats Zelensky. That he would just be like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to join Putin. I'm going to defect to Vladimir Putin and basically commit treason. I would not put that past him. Similar, he has not ruled out using military action to get Greenland. Military action. Not just, hey, we want to be diplomatic. Let's talk dollars and cents. Let's talk about how we can buy Greenland. But no, they better go along with us. And J.D. Vance is humoring him. J.D. Vance is going along with it. And J.D. Vance is one of those guys who, he flips like a switch. He used to be a Trump critic. He hinted or suggested that Trump could either be a cynical a-hole like Nixon or America's Hitler back in 2016. And obviously, he doesn't think Trump is necessarily America's Hitler if he's in his administration now. Or maybe he doesn't. He just doesn't care. But yeah, he'll go along with it. He's a loyalist. He's a careerist. He wants to get Trump's endorsement in 2028, even though Trump didn't quite say that J.D. Vance would be his heir apparent. But yeah, so it seems like it's in the cards for Trump to do something like that and have his administration get behind him. I think he's going to need quite a bit more brains on the operation because he really just doesn't know much about foreign policy. If you want someone who knows about foreign policy, look at Joe Biden, actually, and look at George H.W. Bush. Great example of a Republican who really understood foreign policy. But Trump, no. He's very ignorant when it comes to most policy. So he's going to need a lot more brainiacs. And I'm not saying his administration is full of brains, but some of them are sharper than him when it comes to matters of national security and foreign policy. Tulsi Gabbard, as much as I disagree with her switching from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party and being a grifter, she knows a thing or two about foreign policy. She does. Just because she acts like an airhead at times doesn't mean that she's ignorant. So with her there, with Pete Hegseth there, with all these, and Pete Hegseth's kind of clueless too again, but he'll get the squad around him and they'll concoct some sort of reason for going to war, some sort of pretext. They might be so extreme as to do a false flag. I don't know. That would be insane. But it's interesting that idea is now in the ether, so that if something happens, some supposed terror attack or something, it's something that people will talk about. People talked about whether or not the assassination attempt against Trump in July was fake, you know, that maybe he splattered a thing of ketchup on his ear as fake blood, you know. So people are a lot more skeptical of what comes their way. They're less willing to take things at face value, which is generally a good thing. There's such a thing as being too distrustful, but probably not such a thing when it comes to the Trump administration, because they're a bunch of liars, crooks, and some of the worst people in the country, the least qualified people in the country, and at the same time, the least transparent. Let me know what you think in the comments below about the possibility of Trump starting a war with another nation, either through a false flag or finding some other pretext for doing it. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the More is the Merrier, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.